Okay, good morning everybody, and really a big welcome to our session on promoting high performance through personalised learning. We've got a great setup for you today. I'm Caroline Freeman, I'm Head of Learning Design at Brightwave. And the speakers, we've got 4 speakers. They're each going to speak for about 10 minutes. After each speaker, we're going to have a little interaction. You can answer a poll, and there'll also be time for a bit of Q&A. So we've got Robin Hoyle, author and senior consultant, Miles Runham from BBC Academy, our own Caroline Walmsley, and Colin Welsh, Head of Production at Brightwave. This is the kind of layout of how it's going to work. As I say, they'll each speak, there'll be a poll, and then a little Q&A. Just to give you a bit more information on the poll. So after each speaker, you'll see a multiple choice question. If you want to engage with that, then use the hashtag LTQ, whether it's 1, 2 or 3 for the question, and then take one word from the answer and just pump that into the tweet. And as you can see, we've got tweets coming up on the screen, so we'll be able to see the poll. And if you're tweeting during the session, if you're using the hashtag LearnPersonal, you may see them coming up here. So hopefully you'll engage with that, so we can start to see your opinions of the session as we go along. And for the polls, we'll be taking that information back and writing it up later. So that's really it'll be really useful for everybody. Okay, so we're going to start with Robin Hoyle. If I could ask you to come up, Robin, give you the mic.
Thank you.
Yes, and the tweet.
Thank you, Caroline. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? That's me. There will be an opportunity for everybody to introduce themselves as well in a moment, to go around and do a poll, so prepare to tell me your claim to fame and something interesting about yourself in a second, and that will be the session over, which will be fair enough. I was asked to talk about this because I've written quite a lot about personalisation and things, and the first thing that I would say is that in my first book, The Complete Training one of my manifesto items was this idea of one size does not fit all. And very often we design solutions which have a whole range of different components in, but instead of saying, have a choice about what you do, we actually plot a route through those interventions for people. And those interventions might be a course, or they might involve different resources, whether those are created or curated. It might involve some e-learning, it might involve some collaboration, and very often some collaboration which happens online. So we've got all of these different available options to us, and really if we're thinking about learners as individuals with their own needs and requirements, then we ought to be enabling them to pick and choose which of those options might work for them. But that's quite difficult, isn't it? It's quite difficult. So we've used all sorts of techniques for that in the past, haven't we? We've used things like learning styles questionnaires, for which there is no scientific evidence that they work at all. So I would suggest we don't use those in the future. But we don't necessarily enable people to make the most appropriate choices. And I want to talk about 3 reasons why that might be. The first is people don't know what they don't know. They don't often know where they stack up in terms of their own development priorities, their own development needs. So we need to get a route to enabling people to understand what it is that they know if they are to be active participants in choosing the best options for them. And sometimes when we just say to people, it's over there, go and use some, what we find is that people choose not to, because unless I've got a real pressing need to do something, then why would I prioritize doing an optional set of programs and learning within a really, really busy workload? So I don't know what I don't do, doesn't help. And if I do choose, what I choose is the things that I've chosen in the past. What I've chosen is to go and sit in an M4, in a hotel just off the M4 near Reading, and share chocolate and hobnobs with Albert from accounts, because at least that gets me out of the office for a day, and it feels like I'm being rewarded for long service in some way, because that's comfortable. And really, I'd rather people chose something else which was more appropriate, but perhaps they don't know what they don't know, so they can't do that. My second thing is this idea of, well, let's try and automate that in some way. Let's use, I'd really feel like I ought to just talk to the people on the story carpet down here, which is nice, isn't it? Anyway, the idea here that we've got these things called algorithms that we use to enable us to help people make sense of things. So we can look at what people have done in the past and offer them things based on our fantastic algorithms at the back. And if you've used any of these things, you've seen those things in progress. TripAdvisor, have you ever searched for a hotel on TripAdvisor somewhere? It all goes a little bit spammy after that, doesn't it? You get endless emails from people saying, have you booked a hotel yet? Would you like to book a hotel yet? Why don't you look at this hotel? Look, it's over here. I've already booked a hotel. Leave me alone. Yeah, so we've got these problems. And my favorite is Amazon. Now, I should say that I have got loads of children, okay? And my youngest son was very interested in these things when he was under 10. If you don't know the Redwall Chronicles, think of it a little bit like a kind of pre-10 version of Game of Thrones. So where in Game of Thrones you've got men who are all dressed in animal furs, here you've got animals all dressed in their own furs. And in Game of Thrones, where you've got women floating around in kind of chiffon and silk gowns, which inexplicably fall off as soon as they enter a room with a man dressed in fur, here you've got squirrels. The fur doesn't come off the squirrels. Okay? So this is an innocent version, and for the past however many years, Amazon have been telling me every time Brian Jacks sends out another book. And can I tell you, Brian is productive. So I get an awful lot of emails telling me that there's another Redwall Chronicle available. The problem is the 8-year-old who used to absolutely devour those books now looks like that. He is no longer interested in the medieval battles of squirrels and badgers. So clearly, if Amazon, with all of the data that they've got and all of the resources available, get that stuff wrong, how much data have you got and how much resource can you apply to making those algorithms smart? The answer is a damn sight less than Amazon. Now, I should apologize to Amazon a little bit because I'm being slightly unfair, because I've been boycotting Amazon for the past 6 years. So I don't buy stuff from them anymore, so they've only got old information. I've been boycotting them since I found out they were rapacious tax dodgers with working practices which would shame a Victorian mill owner. But it's your choice if you want to buy the stuff. My books are available on there. If you don't like my principles, I have another set somewhere over here. Okay, so that's the way that works. We've got problems with algorithms because we don't have the resources to make them smart enough to target things properly at people. So let's use social instead, hey? Let's use what people are doing on Twitter and Facebook and various other social media platforms. But there are some dangers with using social feeds, and it's what I call the me-shaped world. And the main danger is not that you're about to get run over by the peloton in the Tour de France in Yorkshire a couple of years ago. Okay, that's not the main danger. The main danger is that we tend to see the world through our interactions with our social media. So if you talk to people about, did you see so-and-so on the news now? It used to be that everybody would say, yes, I saw that, isn't that terrible, or isn't that great, or isn't it fantastic? Now, unless it's been on Facebook, a large proportion of the people who we speak to won't be aware that that's a story. Just a quick straw poll. Raise your hands if you know people who are ardent Labour Party supporters from last May. Anybody know people like that? Have you got them on your Facebook or Twitter feed? Did you read their feeds on May the 8th? Because they couldn't believe that the Labour Party had lost. Because everybody on their Facebook profile was going to vote Labour. Therefore, everybody else in the world was going to vote Labour. And guess what? Their Twitter feed was inaccurate. And there is a serious point to this, which is included in this particular comment. This is from the Open University. If you've not checked out their Innovating Pedagogy series, I urge you to do so. It's fantastic. I just want to focus on this last line in there. We may come to believe that our experiences, views, preferences, and connections are not just the most relevant, but all there is. And one of the problems with just speaking to people who think a bit like I do is that I only get the views of people who think a bit like I do. And how do I get affirmation within social media platforms? I obtain likes. So if I say things that are unpopular or controversial, I am roundly ignored by my social media feed. If I say things that they all agree with already, I get likes and I feel good about myself. It is designed to promote a sense of conformity, and I don't think most organisations want that. So we've got some challenges there, which I can summarise as this. So one size does not fit all, but beware. People do not always know what they don't know, and if you always did what you always did, you always get what you always got. So we've got to encourage people to think slightly outside of what they've done in the past and think more creatively. Dumb algorithms don't help. We are over-reliant on some data. And my last bullet point has disappeared, but it said something about the me-shaped world and social. But it's gone off the slide, so there you go. Who knew? Anyway, fundamentally, that's me. If you want to follow up any of this stuff, you want to ask me any questions, those are my contact details. Despite my trashing of social media, I am on Twitter. See what I mean? Principles are over here. Enjoy. Thank you very much.
So, I just wanted to ask you a question, Robin. But first of all, there's a poll here. So if you want to answer the poll question, what are the greatest potential dangers for adopting personal learning in your organisation? If you take one of these questions, so put the hashtag LTQ1 and then one of the words from the question, from the answer, from your chosen answer, and then we'll see the poll come up. And while we're waiting for that, so you said one size fits all, but there are lots of dangers in creating a me-shaped world. So how do we go about supporting a more kind of personalised learning experience?
I think there are two things, Caroline. I think the first thing is, whereas we know that one size doesn't fit all, what we need to do is to enable people to have some kind of diagnostic process which gets them to the point of determining where they are now and what they need to do in the future. And sometimes we need to break that down into real small bits so that they are looking at an individual task or activity. I'm working with a client at the moment where we've built a diagnostic for them which looks at an individual client with whom they are trying to build a relationship and says, whereabouts have you got to? Here's a load of information about that might help you. Doesn't say will help you, doesn't say you have to do it, isn't mandated, says it might help you get to the next stage of the process with that individual client. And then the second thing is, I'm afraid it's very old-fashioned. You talk to people. You talk to people about what their aspirations are, what their challenges are within their work, and you identify options with them, and that means realistically you need to involve their line managers or people within their team who are perhaps super users or peers who have got more experience to assist them to do that. Is that difficult? Yes. Does it take a lot of resource? Yes. Will you have to spend just about all your working hours trying to get managers engaged with those learning journeys? Yes, you will. I'm sorry, there are no shortcuts to this stuff.
Okay, are there any questions for Robin? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I can, and it still stays with me now, and I can recite the words precisely.
The question was...
The question was, do I have a memory? Thank you, Caroline. Do I have a memory of something that I learned, and can I share it now? When I was 18, I went to university, like many of us do, I suppose, and I signed up for a philosophy course. And within my philosophy course was a course on epistemology, a word which I couldn't even spell, let alone tell you what it meant. And a man walked in who was shuffling along, and he'd got long hair and most of yesterday's dinner down his jumper. And he shuffled in with a briefcase, and he stood there and he goes, "Hello, my name is Stuart Linney, and as you can tell from my accent, I am South African. and in my briefcase I have an elephant. Now that's a memory which has stayed with me for getting on for 40 years now. And it stayed with me for that long because I suddenly thought, I've just entered a world where a man can walk into a room and tell me he's got a briefcase and an elephant, and nobody, an elephant in a briefcase, and nobody laughs at him. And that is a possibility that we can now talk about. And sometimes being shocked out of a comfort zone with something different like that is a really powerful anchor to make you think, I'm an 18-year-old from Bradford. We don't talk about elephants, let alone them being in briefcases. And now I've got this weird shuffling man who looks like he's basically been begging for coins on the street, who's talking to me about these wonderful things. And from there on in, everything is possible. That's my memory of learning something which shocked me at the time and stayed with me ever since.
Okay. Any more questions for Robin? Thanks very much. Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry, sir.
The question is, how do you leverage the me-shaped world within a community? Was that
Poll?
to build a community? To build a community. I think there's two things that you can do with that. The first is encourage people to have a wider network. So speak to people, follow people, communicate with people, engage with people with whom they do not necessarily naturally agree. A little bit of grit makes the pearl in the oyster, and sometimes you need that creative tension. The second thing is, and I hate to get all kind of academic on you here, look at Larve and Wenger's work on situated learning and the idea of peripheral engagement. And the reason that I say that is that they've got this very clear idea that there is a central group of people who are all equally expert, who will communicate, and a group of other people who will watch that. And that's the way those communities work and add value, it seems to me. The Larve and Wenger book called Situated Learning, 2004 I think it is, they were working at Lancaster University at the time.
Okay, thanks very much, Robin. So, next stop is Colin Welsh.
Hello. Okay, is there a clicker? So, yeah, my name's Colin Welsh. I'm head of production at Brightwave, so I run one of our teams that creates custom learning content. When we talk about personalisation, I'm going backwards. Hold on. There we go. So when we talk about personalisation in learning, quite a lot of the time we're talking about algorithms, the sort of stuff Robin was just talking about. So essentially systems that deliver content to the user that it thinks is personalised to them. So the algorithms that Amazon and Spotify and Netflix are using are making observations about the user and their habits and then delivering content to them that it thinks it's relevant that they're going to want to buy. From a learning point of view, the way that we're usually doing that is with both algorithms and with things like diagnostics, which we know about the learner's role, we know their skill levels, we can find out about their interests, and then hopefully try and deliver content to them that's going to be more relevant to them and help them more. But when we deliver that content, it's quite often still e-learning. And e-learning is essentially a published format. It's published with a next button. So whilst we can do nice things with interactions to make the content more engaging, that content is still quite often the same experience for everyone who takes that particular piece of content. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about things that we can do in the ways that we design that content to make it feel more personal and be more personal to the learner as they make their way through it. And one of the ways that we can do that is by using immersive learning design techniques. So what is immersive learning design? So the term itself often conjures up for people kind of high-tech imagery, so like 3D and virtual reality and stuff. But I think this quote from Karim Pagano in her book about immersive learning sums it up really nicely, that immersive learning is about being in the learning, about practicing skills, and being able to make regular decisions. And all of those things make the learning a much more personalised experience. So we can combine two quite powerful techniques to make immersive learning in storytelling and gaming. So I'm just going to run through those, and I'm going to look at some examples of learning projects that have used those techniques. So starting with storytelling, obviously storytelling is one of the oldest forms of learning. It existed before even written language. People would tell stories to each other to teach them things. And with a story, it's you empathise with the characters in a story, and the structure of a narrative in a story reflects the way our brains work. It's about cause and effect. Somebody does something and something happens to them, and then you can learn from that experience, and it's therefore more memorable. If you then add gaming to a story, you're putting the user or the learner or the gamer inside the story themselves, and so they're able to make the decisions. They're not just hearing about someone else's experience, but they're making decisions. They're seeing the immediate impact of those decisions. They're able to fail safely and to try again, and that makes it obviously a much more personal experience for them because they're in the story and they're controlling how that story goes. The other thing that gaming does incredibly well is giving feedback. Julie Dirksen talks a lot about feedback in games, and she's found that the average e-learning course gives you feedback every 5 to 10 minutes, which is one of the reasons why people find e-learning so incredibly boring most of the time. And that feedback is quite often in the form of a kind of an end-of-module quiz, which is really just a memory test to see if you've remembered what you've just taken in. Whereas video games give you feedback on average every 7 to 10 seconds. So in games designed by like Electronic Arts, you're making a decision every couple of seconds and then getting almost immediate feedback on that decision, whether that be in the form of more points or a power-up or you get killed or whatever. So it obviously keeps the learner much more engaged. It makes the experience much more personal for them. So as I said, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just looking at how we can combine those two techniques, storytelling and gaming, to make learning feel a lot more personalised for learners. Oh, hello, what have I done? There we go. So the first couple of examples I'm going to use interactive film. This is what we refer to as a simple string of pearls approach. So essentially it's a linear narrative, but it has really, really regular decision points. And each decision is sort of formatted in the same way. It's a bit like a joke. So there's a setup, so a scenario of some sort, a response, so the decision itself, and then a variety of reactions depending on the decision you made. If you've made a good decision, you go on to the next level. If not, then you get the opportunity to go back and try again. And the key to this technique working well is the rapidity with which you do it. If you're doing that over and again quickly, the learner feels like they're in the experience, like in Karim Pagano's quote, and they're influencing what's going on. So I've got a little clip. I'm going to run over here because I'm going to have to play this video. So this is a course that we developed for Diageo, and it's training for bartenders. And essentially it uses this technique. So it's, as I said, it's an interactive video-based project. So I'll just play this little clip. So it was a series of challenges, and essentially they're short stories about somebody coming into a bar and ordering drinks.
No, sir, what can I get you?
Hi, can I get one mojito, one cosmopolitan, and one G&T, please?
Coming up.
Okay, so that's the setup. So the guys ordered a round of drinks. Then we get the opportunity to make the decision. So in this instance, it's which glass are we going to serve him the cosmopolitan in. If I make a decision, so I'll choose that glass in the middle.
The wrong glass? Go back to bar school, please.
So you get your immediate reaction, a bit of an over-the-top reaction in this instance, and then the opportunity to go back and try that decision again. And the whole program was built on that model over and over. So after the glasses, you choose the spirits. We introduced various customer service skills that had to come in, so somebody else comes to the bar. And we built the whole program around that, so within making decisions within scenarios quickly and getting immediate feedback, which is obviously far more of a personal feeling experience than just if we'd written a big traditional e-learning course with a module about glasses and a module about spirits. We took it to Demo Fest. This is just bragging now. We took it to Demo Fest at DevLearn last year, and we won a couple of awards for it. But some of the feedback we got was really kind of backed up the design thinking that we put into it, that it was really immersive and contextual, felt authentic. So that's the string of pearls technique. As I said, it's essentially a linear story, but with the opportunity to make lots of regular decisions and get really regular feedback. So you're starting to approach the level of feedback that you get in a video game as opposed to a traditional e-learning course. This technique works really well where there are kind of very definitive rights and wrongs, but for a lot of content, it's more nuanced than that, especially when we're dealing with content with a lot of interpersonal skills in it. So in those situations, we can start getting into using kind of more complex branched scenarios. So this is a content map from a project that we currently have in development. It's another interactive film-based course. And as you can see from this map, I had to sort of spread it over because it goes across 2 slides. This is one episode. And as you can see, the decisions that you make can take you down entirely different story arcs within the story. So the designers who worked on this were inspired by an episodic video game called The Walking Dead. I don't know if any people know. It's also a TV series, but it's designed very cleverly to make the user feel like they're completely controlling the story as they go through. Although, as you can see within this episode, there's a kind of oops, I've gone backwards again. There's a couple of branches. But the in and out points of each episode are the same. The gateways in and out of each episode are the same. So you can give the learner a much more personalised feeling experience without going off down kind of exponential branches and having to do a lot of content development. So those have both been video-based techniques for making learning feel more personal. Video isn't always the most suitable medium for learning. If there's not a story that you can tell with characters, it doesn't always work well, and you might not always have the budget for it. But you can use very similar techniques just using text. So this is a text-based mission game that we're currently building. It's about anti-corruption, and the mission that you're going through is trying to improve the healthcare system of an entire country using a very large budget, on schedule, but without giving in to corruption. So again, the technique is it's a story, you're making really regular decisions, they're really tough decisions in this case, and the feedback comes not only in the form of how the story goes, but with some other variables. So whether you're on schedule or not, whether you're, how your reputation's doing, and of course the number of lives you've saved. So this one's a little bit more complex technically in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, in that decisions that you make early on in the story can then influence what happens later. So one example is if you buy very, very cheap drugs, later on in the story it turns out that they're fake and loads of people die, and that's a bad thing. But again, it's, you can get through to the end of it, you can do okay, and it encourages replay value. People can learn by making the wrong choices, which is often as effective or more effective than seeing best practice. So that's another technique, a text-based mission game. Also, with all of these sort of game-based approaches, it's really important to keep the learner in flow, by which I mean you have to design the challenge so that it's not so hard as to be too challenging and people give up, but also not so easy that it's very, very boring. So you have to be very careful with how you write your stories and the decisions that you're asking people to make. Just a couple of other things to sum up, some other kind of tips around how you can make the content itself feel more personalised to the user. Personalised dashboards work really well. This is a course we developed about how to use social media. So you can do little things like picking your character from one of 6 at the start, and then you're guiding them through a series of challenges. Those challenges are about how to use social media networks effectively, and again, each one's a little scenario, it's a story, and you have to help your character to use the social media networks well in order to improve their reach and engagement. Again, that encourages replay value. You can kind of complete each task, but then go back. So personalised dashboards work really well. Where you've got content where there's a lot of interdependent variables, developing sort of Tycoon-style simulation games can be really effective for that. So this isn't something we developed. This is a game called Game Dev Story that Caroline and I have been playing quite competitively against each other, where you actually have to manage a team of games developers. So it's completely non-linear. There is a timeline, but you can pick and choose at whatever point which projects you want to take on when you train up your staff. And as you can see, Caro, you might want to look away now, actually, because my team is running at a loss of $146,000 at the moment. Given my day job is managing a production team, I probably shouldn't have put that on. But we've used similar techniques in some courses we've produced. So this is a course about managing a water treatment plant. And again, you're faced with regular alerts that come up about things that are happening, and the decisions you make then influence the efficiency and safety of your plant. So, to sum up, as I said, a lot of the personalisation techniques that we talk about are about the kind of algorithms that are at system level, delivering the right content to the user. But hopefully, this has just given you an idea about some of the things that we can do within that content itself to make it feel much more personalised to the learner. Those things are putting them into the story, allow them to influence the outcome of that story, let them fail safely, give really, really regular feedback, and that all allows them to personalise their own journey through the content. So that's me.
Right, thank you, Colin. I'll just allow a little bit of time for questions. I've got a question, which is, what are the kind of techniques for ensuring that you're getting that level of flow within something that's quite complex?
So the difficulty level of the game,
Yeah.
you mean? So the key to that is just prototyping it really, really early in the development process. So once you've mapped out what the learning points are that you want to get across in your game, take a small section of that and build a prototype of it and just get people to play it. So it can look rubbish and just be built very roughly, but until you've kind of established the feedback from the people who are going to be playing the game, use people who are similar to your target audience or who are your target audience, and then use that before you even start writing the rest of the content and developing the rest of the game. That's usually the best, is early prototyping.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the floor for Colin?
Okay, that question was in terms of budget, what would you recommend really? So that's a tough question. Spend as much money as you can. No, in terms of budget, I mean, obviously there's a lot of the video examples that I showed are very, very media rich. And as I said, that's not always appropriate. So with the Diageo course, the video shoot in itself was 3 days in length, and the video, I think, cost about 20 grand just for the video alone. So that was a very, very media rich course. But for something like the anti-corruption course I showed you, that was a mission within a course. I forget what the total budget of that was, but it was probably sort of in the high teens, low 20s, that sort of budget range. So these techniques need not be horrendously expensive. And even the string of pearls technique, we've built little prototypes in things like Articulate Storyline, which are very cheap to produce. You can even shoot your own video and do it. When we went to DevLearn last year, when we arrived in America, we shot a little video ourselves and built a little course in Storyline that we then used as part of our presentation about sort of gaming and learning. So it can be done very simply and very cheaply.
I think it really depends on the audience. So the Diageo one is actually, it's accessible through a web portal, so it's customer facing. So they want, it's like a marketing exercise in lots of ways. And if it's internal and your culture is a relaxed one, you can use, if the thing is engaging, it doesn't have to be, it can be shot on a phone, quite frankly. It just depends on the culture and the audience and what will resonate with your audience, I think. Are there any more questions for Colin? I've got another one, which is just that obviously if you're creating branches, then you're creating more content, and people will be thinking about the potential costs of that. So do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so obviously, but that's one of the alarm bells that usually rings for people when you start talking about branching, is how many branches do you get? And if you get branches upon branches, you can end up developing a huge amount of content that only a small percentage of the learners are actually going to see. So the first thing is to start, as you would with any project, by content mapping it and action mapping it and working out what the learning points and how they need to fit into your story are. So when you're writing a story, you're making sure that it's covering everything as efficiently as possible. And then, as with the content map that I had up earlier, if you limit the branching to be happening within episodes, so all the episodes finish at the same point, then it's essentially going to be a linear story, but you feel much more, you have much more of a personalised experience within that, following separate story arcs within episodes.
And in terms of the prototyping, at what stage do you think it's best to prototype?
As well as early as is technically possible. I'd say do it before you've even, make it one of the very first. If you decided to use an immersive design approach, and it's going to be a game-based, especially if it's using video, getting the pace right, making sure that the difficulty levels are right, making sure it feels quick enough that the learner is actually in a scenario. Just get it done first, basically, and then go from there. Base your design on what you find out from the prototyping and not the other way around.
Okay, were there any more questions on the floor for Colin? Just to explain what's happening with the poll, the first poll, we've got all the results, but they weren't visible. So I think from now on, we're seeing the visibility of the polls, a little technical hitch, but on the first poll. But we'll be collecting all those results and distributing them later. We're going to put together a kind of report on the poll. Yeah? Sorry?
Interactive videos winning.
Yes, it looks like interactive videos winning, which is great. And if anybody is interested in seeing a demo of the water game, that's on our stand, which is just there. So do come round afterwards and have a look, play for yourself. So next up is Miles Runham. You got the mic? There's the mic.
Is this thing on? I'm live. Good. Hello, everybody. It's good to see so many of you here. So I'm going to try and point this the right way round for a start. So I'm Miles Runham. I'm the head of digital at the BBC Academy. And just as a kind of little bit of a context, an introduction to why I'm going to say what I'm going to say, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of what I think that means. So what we're about at the moment, and I think a lot of organisations are at the BBC Academy, is we're trying to develop a digital strategy that produces, the end result would be, in my articulation, a digital learning service rather than a kind of training organisation or an L&D department. It's a genuine service targeted at producing products and content in a digital environment, which are basically the building blocks of a digital learning service. So what I mean by that a little bit more is actually that has to be all about the user experience. So our articulation and my articulation of that is that user needs define the context and the relevance and the use cases for what we need to do. That user experience doesn't mean user interface, it doesn't mean design, it does mean choosing a color, but it's not about coloring in, it's about the whole experience. It's about what the department does, what our users do, and us creating a context that's useful and relevant for people. So I'm thinking about the notion of personalisation in that context. What does a personalisation and the personalisation of a learning service mean to our users as we see them? So I think the first point, and this is where I'd start with this, is what's the market telling us? And I think increasingly, and it's obvious, and you can see the examples of it all around us now, in this very large room with very well appointed stands, is that the market is telling us that personalisation is by me and for me. So that doesn't mean, and crucially there's a subtle but powerful difference, it doesn't mean by you for me, by you meaning the provider of learning, the department or the service or the content provider for me. I am now the person that decides what I want, when I want it, and how I'm going to use it. So those personal digital experiences set the pace, and the pace is set by the use of the tools that Robin was describing in large part. There are certain pitfalls and there are problems, but our use of tools like Google Now, Facebook, Twitter, etc., those set the pace for what we think of as good for us and relevant for us. They set the time and the place of use. So, which usually means the device, and that device could be any device, but mostly now it's the device that you carry with you in your hand and put in your pocket or your purse. And I think there are issues with it, but social network activity is becoming that network, the mechanism of personal choice. We've already seen the power of searching and the context, some of the issues around algorithmic use, but the notion of you deciding what's relevant and most helpful is usually through some kind of social experience now. And that tends to create a personalised experience. It may not be that is a tool designed to create a personal learning environment for you, but you can use those tools to create a personal learning experience, a personal experience of any kind, in fact. So I think personalisation is social now, and that's around the network that you choose. And I think it's correct that we do choose networks that we know, because that's where anybody starts from. That's certainly true with Facebook, and I think you're right, that the notion of a Facebook personal network tends to have a bigger echo chamber effect. At the moment, you confirm your Facebook activity by liking. Facebook are planning a whole range of new emoticons now, so they're going to have kind of angry, not like so much. I'm not going whether they're going to have, I don't know exactly what the design solutions are, but that's on its way. They know that simply liking or not commenting isn't enough for a more sophisticated user experience. I think Twitter's slightly different. It's more open. In fact, you can find people can get angry with you on Twitter very, very quickly, I've found. Very, very quickly. Almost without trying, I'd say. So I think there is an echo chamber problem, but I don't think it's necessarily an insoluble problem, and I think there is development of solutions to that. But I think the most significant thing in choosing your network, the trust is implicit in that, because I've chosen those network connections. I can unfollow, unfriend, I can block, I can report spam. It's my network for me to do what I want with, and that makes it very personal, and it's around my needs. I think that also it creates an anticipation with users that we now, and I do this, I want to pull. I don't want things pushed at me very much anymore, unless it's pushed in a very sophisticated way, and I'll come back to that. It's actually down to me to pull what I want from the sources of smart recommendations that my network will provide. I think it's really important to be transparent about that. What data are you using? What are those relationships? How have you come to that point? And I think some of the algorithm solutions don't do that very well. They're clearly really spamming and selling. I think some of the social algorithm users are better at that. The notion of the what's this, how did this recommendation get to me is really important. So it needs to win your trust, I think we need to give back a transparency of how we use that data. So that model is becoming commonplace. I think there's an important distinction, and it's more than an academic distinction, between customization and personalization. Personalization is very much, I think it should be by me, for me, pulled for me. I think the notion of segmentation through customization is really powerful, though, and you can start to build out and narrow down segments and small groups. And with the right design treatment, the right user experience, that can very much feel personal as well. I think Rob was identifying that in the gaming experience. It feels like I'm in control, but not necessarily only for me, but it's well targeted and well segmented. I think we probably have some of the data for this now. I don't think any of us are particularly good at using it. I think LMS data is available to be used in that way. I don't think we're really questioning that data set in this way, in a sophisticated way yet. But I think we can start to take smaller steps to cater for some of those small groups. And in many cases, actually, well presented, that might take you as far as you need. We might not need to personalize, we customize and target more smartly. I think it's really important as well, against that thought, one of the things that's a real challenge for those of us who are dealing with, we might have lots of content, but we don't have as much content as the web can pull through a Facebook or a Twitter feed. We need to be able to manage what we have against those segments properly. And I think we need to be smart about creating templates and creating formats and nuggets of content that can be placed in front of those segments in a way that's easier for us to manage. So this is more about us as publishers being smarter about how we target and not necessarily only being pulled. And the sophisticated targeting does make it more personal. I think I used to work quite a long time ago now, although I'm deceptively young looking, but I worked for some time in a search engine business in the early days of what's now become the multi-billion-dollar digital advertising market. Digital advertising agencies are really, really sophisticated at this. They can be spammy, sure, but they're very, very good at using different data sets to identify common interests, common needs, overlaps, and surprising requirements from their users. And it's quite interesting conversations to have with people who work in those organizations about how do you treat those data sets to place a piece of content or an experience in front of segments or individuals in ways that I think in the learning industry we probably don't think like that yet. I think it's very interesting to see tools like Google Now as a personalization experience where there's a use of notifications, the card metaphor as a notification, very subtle and simple triggers of what might be of interest to you. I think that becomes a much better user experience because it's less of that kind of sense of interruption that we often see in e-learning, which is you are now going to look at this because you did that. It's more of a kind of a hint of this might be helpful to you. Very easy to dismiss, very powerful to use and continue to use with a system that learns with you. So actually, I think we could probably start to customize through those kinds of products and those kinds of experiences as much as we might need to personalize as well. So I think as a perhaps a bigger point is, and this is much harder for us to consider, I think, but do we actually need to create a learning product for this kind of thing, or do we actually need to put our learning experiences and our learning content in systems and tools that are already really good at personalization, that are built for pull content, they're built for me to pull my content in the network and the context that I define? that actually could start to become a much more powerful experience. There's tools like, or environment like Stack Overflow, very worth looking at as a very, very sophisticated way of me choosing the context and the content and the contacts that help me learn, mainly for software developers, but they're offering a lot more content now. There's a tool like Slack, which is a collaboration kind of messaging tool. You can choose your contacts and choose the channels. It's a workflow tool that you can inject content into, and you can update and learn from each other as you go in the work that you're doing. I think that becomes a very lightweight but quite sophisticated way of using it and allowing users to control, again, what they do personally for what's relevant for their work now. I think that we pull all that relevant content into social messaging projects. I think that starts to become a more powerful experience. I think it's starting to happen. I think we can start to use quite a lot of free tools to experiment with that as well. So I think what that means for us is, again, I think we need to start to think about creating content that's pulled, not pushed. So that changes the notion of a learning destination. We're very good at building portals. We're very good at building microsites, places that people need to go to consume the carefully crafted learning that we create. I think we can flip that and say, why don't we actually be carefully craft learning and put that in front of people where they need it? So it distributes. It's more of a distribution than a publishing mechanism. A lot of online publishers are starting to act that way because they know that that's what people do. People don't go to destinations anymore. We anticipate that the content we need is in front of us in the tools that we use. You need the analytics to support that. That's very, very hard, as we've heard. It's not a simple thing to do, but it's a crucial skill set that we all need to start to develop. And community hosting becomes a really, really important ingredient of making sense and relevance of these things. We need to create environments that are welcoming. I think we need to create environments that are challenging. We need to sort of create a burst through that echo chamber. We need to introduce people to each other they might not have expected to meet. And so I think there's a whole set of skills there that are becoming much more relevant for us. One size doesn't fit all. In the space of an hour, that's become a hackneyed phrase on this stand. I think there's much to learn. So I think we always need to learn more about our users. We never know as much as we think we do. And we have to ask them continually, and I have to be very, very good at reading the signals that they present us with through the tools they use. We need to know about our capability. What are our teams good at? What does a good L&D, digital L&D service or a good digital learning service look like? It's not a training department, but what does that mean? What do you have? What do you need to bring in? Who do you hire? Who do you bring in to challenge your thinking? It's about cultures. It's about the culture of the team, but the culture of the organization. It has to make sense for the culture you're presenting it in. I think we need to test and experiment. There are plenty of free tools that we can use. It's a question of time. There are plenty of opportunities to pilot as well. We're working with Brightwave on piloting Tesselo because we need to understand this better. We need to understand what we can do with it. We need to understand what people want to do with it. And not all answers will apply, and they certainly won't apply for long. So when you've got something right now, we need to be really smart about using that data feedback to make sure that it's still right, because in months' time, let alone years' time, it will need adjusting. So there's something about that kind of agile flexibility that we need to apply to these things, because it's not for us, it's for the individuals that we need to service. Thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you, Miles. I think that polling will come up in a second on the question, but I just wanted to ask you, a lot of the things that you're talking about are about changing what L&D is doing, and they will involve a whole bunch of new skills. So what kinds of skills do you think a learning department needs to be able to provide that kind of environment rather than content?
So I think we need to start to be thinking about designing that user experience. And in a digital environment, I guess now that includes the skills of user experience designers, not just graphic designers. It includes roles like information architects. It includes, for me and my team now, we have developers, software engineers, software developers running agile teams to get further, faster for less. I think that's a really interesting change and not always easy to pull off. We've had the sort of the latitude to do that. And I think it's also about the notion of, I think it's a whole, so there are roles and skills formally called designer. and they might be a designer of a system, they might be a designer of a user experience. I think the skills and the mindset we need to develop is really a design with a small d. So what we're trying to do is design a service and tools to help people make sense of what we're offering them and make the sense of the way they work and the world they work in. So I think it's that design sensibility less than the kind of systems approach, and less of that destination thinking and more of the distribution thinking.
So you're bringing new people into the team that are coming from, what kind of context are they coming from?
So the people that we've been working with, we work with freelancers who've had most relevant experience. I guess I'm from a BBC point of view, we paint these things with different language. So we tend to try and bring in editorial people, as we would call them. So they're storytellers. They make stories in audio, in video and text. They're good at telling stories. They're not necessarily good at product design, but then we have product management people who can help create an environment that allows those stories to work best, whether it needs to be packaged as one story or distributed as a story across different elements of the ecosystem. So I think those are two of the kinds of people that we're bringing in to help us figure this out.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions for Miles from the floor? No? Okay, in terms of the poll, we can see that creating pool-based learning is the favourite there, in terms of the challenge. I think that's probably also about the skills and the changing capabilities within a learning department as well.
One further comment, if it does help just to manage the poll, actually that is the right answer. That was my top answer too, just in case.
All right, thanks very much, Miles. So I'll hand over to Caroline, also another Caroline, very confusing.
Hello everybody. My name's Caroline Wormsley and I'm the Managing Director of Brightwave, which means I'm lucky enough to work with that talented bunch of people over there. Smile. There we are, on demand. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about personalised learning. One of the things that we've been doing at Brightwave over the last couple of months is conducting what we've called a customer discovery exercise, which means we've been going out and talking to our customers, not really to do anything more than try and understand what's going on in their business, listening to the problems and the challenges that they're facing. And some interesting results came of those conversations, and what we wanted to do was take that back to the team at Brightwave and put our technical and our design smarts to the problem and see what we could come up with. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. The one thing that came out over and above all the rest is that the way we consume content is changing. And I don't think that's news to anybody. We're all used to different sorts of experiences, whether it be movies on demand by Netflix or shopping, via Amazon. Maybe not Robin, but we've got very sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated consumer experiences, and we want those reflected in our learning experiences as well. So leading brands are changing the way in which they're targeting consumers. And I'll give you an example of this. You may or may not be aware that quite recently Brightwave was acquired by Capita, and we now form part of their learning services division, which is great news for us. That acquisition happened over the past conversations around that acquisition happened over the past couple of months, and I was involved quite heavily in them. While I was involved in them, I also had to carry on conducting my day-to-day life, so I was placing weekly shopping orders. As the acquisition conversations progressed, my supermarket knew by the offers that it was forwarding to me that my consumption for caffeine, chocolate, gin and tonic was also increasing. So those sorts of tailored experiences I found very, very useful. In a learning perspective, in workplace learning, what it shows is that the same thing applies. The sheep dip model of workplace learning isn't going to work anymore. It's not going to work in the future. It's wasteful, it's expensive, it doesn't provide an effective learning experience, and ultimately it fails to compete for learners' attention. So, as a result of the conversations that we had, the overwhelming response from the businesses that we talked to. It's quite important this. They weren't learning challenges, they were business challenges. Businesses found that they wanted to increase employee engagement. A lot of them had problems with employee engagement. A lot of them wanted to increase professional development within their organisation, and a lot of them had issues around performance support at the point of need. So we thought, well, okay, if those are the problems that the business is facing, what can we do as learning experts to help them solve those problems? Personalised learning is something that we're passionate about at Brightwave, and we see it very much driving the future of learning technologies. So we thought, well, what does it require? For us, there were 5 core elements. The first one, adaptive technology. What we think is required is that we need to keep up with the needs and expectations of our learners. As I said, they've got increasingly sophisticated and consumer demands in many cases. We think it has to be multi-channel. You need to get the right content to the right people at the right time. Data and analytics, this is an important one because it's no longer just about tracking whether or not something has been consumed. Somebody's consumed a course or a piece of learning. What we need to be able to demonstrate is actually, has it worked? Was it effective? Capability frameworks are key. For us, capability frameworks allow us to not just ensure that a bare minimum standard has been reached, but actually allows us to increase the performance of an organisation. You can raise the bar, not just deliver what's required. And finally, learning pathways. You can actually, personalised learning for us means creating learner-driven journeys that actually can be designed to support the needs of the business. So, to come back to the 3 problems, the 3 core challenges, employee engagement. This is key, I think, because we spoke to people who were working in L&D in our client organisations, and also to the managers running those organisations. And the same issues kept bubbling up and up. The managers of the organisations were very concerned about employee engagement as opposed to learner engagement. And so for us, this was a business challenge, but actually one that L&D really could solve. For us, personalised learning means you're empowering your employees. You're empowering them to drive the organisation forward. If you empower your employees, you'll engage them. And if you engage them, what we found was that actually you've got innovators in your business. You will empower people to innovate, to share their knowledge, to share their skills. And actually in doing so, you will drive the performance of the organisation. Professional development was an interesting one because a lot of organisations that we spoke to wanted to keep their, and it's linked actually to the employee engagement piece, they wanted to keep their employees engaged by allowing them to be in control of their own professional development. Some of the L&D people that we spoke to, some of the people who were brave enough to be very honest with us, said actually that scares me a little bit. It scares me that the learner might actually be in control of their learning. What we found was that if you put the learner in control of their L&D, you give them the freedom to develop in the way in which they want to, at the point in which they want to, and L&D provides a framework within that freedom to operate. Again, you can actually increase the performance of the business. For us, if you can empower your learners and create autonomous professional development, it will allow you to retain sort of top talent in your organisation, cut any skill deficits, and improve the performance of an individual, a team, or an organisation. Performance support. It's our belief, and I don't know whether or not that you share it, that a highly sort of performing individual, somebody who's performing well in an organisation, tends to want to solve a problem at the point at which they encounter it. They don't want to encounter a problem, put it to one side and think, I'll have to deal with that when I take my course in a week's time. They need to do it, people need to do their jobs at the point of need. And because everyone loves a statistic, this one's quite compelling, I think. Using performance support methodologies, 80% of employees reach their quality competency goal compared to only 55% of those that used external support. So there's a massive gap there. And so what it told us really was if performance support is at the point of the need, then everybody benefits, including the organisation. I've whistled through that, but We are over there. If you want to sort of talk more about the findings and the conversations that we had, I'd be delighted to speak with you. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. I think that's... there's one more poll that's going to come up, so do answer the poll for us. That would be great. Which is the most important requirement for personalised learning in your organisation? If there are any immediate questions for Caroline from the floor, we'll take them. Otherwise, if you're feeling shy, come and talk to us personally on the stand. Great, and thanks very much for attending today.